Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Nate, and welcome back to another weather forecast discussion. It is for September 23rd, 2022. Now, our headlines for today are pretty simple. We're going to be talking about the next general weather over the next couple of days for the United States. Then we're going to mention Gaston and Tropical Depression 10. We're also going to mention Fiona bringing major impacts to Nova Scotia. We will be live covering that tonight with Morgan because we do believe that it probably will be a significant situation to the point to where we will have high storm surge, very strong damaging winds, and it could potentially cause some significant amounts of power outages. And then finally, we will be mentioning our new tropical development over here, Tropical Depression 9 in the Caribbean, as that is likely to become our next major hurricane according to the National Hurricane Center, as it will eventually propagate further northwest into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, we'll start with the United States and even into portions of Canada. You guys could potentially listen to this as well, as we do have a nice little low pressure system over the north central portions of the United States and the southern prairies of Canada. This is going to create a lot of showers and thunderstorms and even propagate further eastward. We also have a big high pressure right over here that is going to be creating a lot of just warm, dry air in general. And speaking of dry air, we also have our cold front that is currently off of the eastern coast, which is bringing a lot of cool temperatures across the board over into the eastern United States. This is also going to aid Fiona in regards to its turn towards Nova Scotia later on. If we take a look at the models, the North American model, or at least the 3-kilometer version of it, which is basically a higher resolution version of this model, basically depicts the same exact thing that I have mentioned. We do have a lot of showers and thunderstorms that are expected to move off across portions of the Midwest into the Great Lakes here this afternoon into this evening. On Friday, the time is of course above me in Eastern, so if you're in Central, my apologies. You're just going to have to subtract 1 hour to kind of stay up to date. But as this continues to move on through, you can see into the evening and into the overnight hours, this rain will continue to move on through, and it will set up for some more showers and thunderstorms across the Great Lakes and even into the Ohio River Valley on Saturday. Not expected to be too much, but some areas over in Indiana and Ohio could potentially see some strong damaging winds and maybe even some spotty hail. Now on Sunday, this is where stuff really starts to get really interesting. As you can see, those showers and thunderstorms continue to propagate further into the mid-Atlantic. You can see some showers and thunderstorms begin to form across portions of the Appalachians, and that will continue to form more and more showers and thunderstorms along that line, potentially creating some severe weather for portions of central to eastern Pennsylvania, even into portions of, once again, the mid-Atlantic, with areas along the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, much of Maryland, Virginia, potentially DC, Delaware, as well as New Jersey, and even into portions of North Carolina. You guys definitely would need to watch out for that, as once again, strong damaging winds, spotty hail, maybe even the chance for a tornado or two cannot be ruled out. But as of right now, it's a little bit harder to tell in regards to what type of parameters you guys could be expecting to see there. Alrighty, shifting gears real quickly. We're briefly mentioning Tropical Storm Gaston. They are currently impacting the Azores, so if you are in the Azores, definitely be sure to prepare for that. It's not expected to be super significant over there. Strong damaging winds, maybe some slight amounts of storm surge, but if you guys stay in the highest portion of the islands, you guys should preferably be fine. Just stay away from the coastlines. Don't do anything stupid that could get you caught at any sort of rip currents, because storm surge is going to be a thing, and rip currents will be a thing, of course, with every storm system that passes on through. We also have Tropical Depression 10 over here across the coast of Western Africa. This is currently gathering more and more showers and thunderstorms, but the fortunate thing is that once this thing does continue to strengthen, it more than likely will head off across portions of the open Atlantic, so not really a major contributor to land whatsoever. Now finally, we get into the nitty-gritty of this entire thing, and step one here is talking about Fiona. And Fiona here is in the weird part of the satellite where it starts to kind of glitch out a little bit. So you're going to have to kind of, bear with me for a little bit here. But you can kind of see, here is Fiona. You can see the eye right about there. You can see Bermuda on the southern side of that as well. And then, of course, you can make out the east coast of the United States as well as Nova Scotia up above. This is also encountering a lot of wind shear because we had a low pressure system about a day or two ago that came on through and brought a giant cold front. You can kind of see the lingering portion of that boundary as that extends through, and you can even see the path of the clouds that kind of follow up along that boundary. And to kind of, reciprocate as to what I mean, look at these clouds and how they form on the northern side of Fiona, but then they immediately just kind of burst northwards. And that is a lot of your northerly shear that is kind of aiding Fiona in its track as it moves along through. Now, once again, this is also going to be one of those things to where it will also aid the wind shear of Fiona, regardless of it encountering cooler waters, which will weaken its overall structure. And you can kind of see what I mean here, because as we take a look at the hurricane hunters, you can kind of see how Fiona has progressed. This is where the hurricane hunters first went through the central pressure of Fiona, so basically the eye, and it found it at 937 millibars. The second pass was at 936, and then the last one was a little bit higher at 938. So you can see that even though it is stagnating at a low pressure, the higher the pressure it is, the weaker the actual storm gets. And we can anticipate that to continue to be the case, although it is more than likely going to stagnate right around that area, which could aid to some significant wind shear. And the other reason why I want to bring this up is because you can kind of see these contours in all sorts of different colors. And at the bottom part of your screen, you can see what these contours actually mean in knots. And the best way to take away from all of this is that once you get to the purple, that's hurricane force winds. And once you get towards these kind of brighter pinks, even into the salmon colors, if you will, that is starting to get into significant hurricane strength, winds, potentially even above category 3 strength. So that is something to note here as this continues to move on through, is that they are encountering some category 3 winds here in regards to the placement of Fiona, at least in its second pass as it went through into the center of Fiona. Otherwise, you can also notice that as this did make a pass through, you notice that on the eastern side of Fiona, you had a lot stronger and more consistent winds here on its eastern side of Fiona. But then as they pass through to the western side, you notice that with the lack of clouds over here on the western side of Fiona, you also notice that the winds are a lot weaker too. So not as large of a wind field on its western side compared to its eastern side of this actual major hurricane. Regardless, here's the track of the National Hurricane Center for Fiona. You can see how it will continue to propagate further towards the northeast, and then it will sharply curl off to the north. So you can expect areas over here in eastern Nova Scotia to practically receive the brunt of it, especially if you are on the eastern side, because if you think of it this way, Fiona is spinning counterclockwise. So you have winds that are coming up this way and winds that are coming up this way. The winds are going to hit it from the side, and that is where most of your actual storm surge will come from, because it is basically pushing that water up against the actual island here. And the same thing goes for the northern side of Nova Scotia too, as on the backside, you will also have winds that will come in from the rear and once again push that water up inland. So hurricane warnings have been issued in the areas in the red. Of course, tropical storm warnings have been issued in blue, and tropical storm watches here in the northern portions of Newfoundland and maybe even into Quebec is possible here as you get into the early stages of Sunday. But the expected landfall here is sometime early Saturday morning, sometime past midnight, more than likely sometime around the 8 o'clock in the morning hours. So myself and Morgan are expected to live stream tonight. We more than likely will start trying to live stream sometime around midnight Eastern. So if you guys want to watch that, we'll have all sorts of reactions in regards to the storm surge as well as the winds inland. And we do have radars over there which can actually help us depict as to what exactly is going on with Fiona and where the most significant impacts could potentially occur. Now we can also get a general idea of what we can expect here. And by doing so, we're going to take a look at the HWRF model, because this technically is a hurricane model more than just a general model. So this is more fine-tuned to these types of extreme weather, if you will. And as this continues to move on through, you can see our current position of Fiona, which is north of Bermuda, once again, just to kind of align up everything. And this kind of makes a curl to the left. You see, it's not a complete curl to the left, but it does veer off that way from its original position, making the eastern portions of Nova Scotia the actual threat here. And as we continue to play this along, once again, the timing is above me. You can see that as we progress here, we do have our winds in kilometers per hour. So for the people who live in Canada, you guys can actually kind of attest to what your significant winds could potentially be. But here's the streamlines. You can see the general path of our winds here as this continues to propagate. And the eastern side of Nova Scotia, once again, is taking that brunt of it because you have your significant winds that are actually being forced into that area, whereas contrast to the central and western portions of Nova Scotia, to where you have winds being pulled out from the southern side here on this actual system. So expect storm surge to not be super significant on the western side of the system, but on the eastern side, that will be the case. Also, you notice that I mentioned the northern side of Nova Scotia will more than likely see that threat of storm surge, and indeed that is the case as well, because once again, you have your streamlines of winds that are pushing up against the actual area here, and this is expected to continue to be that way all the way up until the system moves on out. But you can see for hours on end, you can see it continues to just batter that same exact area. And that's just the unfortunate circumstance of the positioning between these islands over here and Fiona as it continues to propagate further northward. So the main areas to watch here, if you're in Nova Scotia, is the eastern side here, to where you're expected to see storm surge coming in from the east. So the waves will be propagating from the east. And then afterwards, once we get into the latter stages of the morning hours of Saturday, you can also expect it to see it come from the south as winds will begin to veer in that general direction. As well as the northern side of Nova Scotia, you can see winds will continue to batter it from the north. And we can see that here with our wave heights here, as this continues to propagate further forward. Once we get from the latter stages of tonight into tomorrow, waves are expected to be pretty high here. Maximum about 45 feet, which is about 10 meters plus if you are kind of trying to get a general idea of to what's happening here. So storm surge will be relatively high as winds will dictate practically the entirety of this event here, both on land and off land. So now the last thing that we got to mention here is Tropical Depression 9. As we zoom in here, you can see the current positioning of it. You can see there's Puerto Rico, there's Hispaniola, there's Cuba, and then you can start to see portions of Central America right there with Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. And you can see this thing is starting to get, starting to kind of get a little bit more of a tightened low pressure system. You can see it's kind of gotten a little bit more defined with its actual spin, compared to what it was yesterday, to where you didn't really have a complete tightening of the winds centralized into one spot. So you have a bit of a vortex right about there. But you also notice two things with that. First off, you notice the vortex is kind of veering off to the north. And usually when that happens, you can expect the vortex to either dissipate, or you can expect the vortex to kind of curl back down, and it isn't really completely fine-tuned into one general position. And what I mean by that is when you have hurricanes, when you have tropical systems, they typically like to vertically align their vortex. They like to extend up further into the atmosphere. And because of what's happening right now with the wind shear, which is strong wind shear coming from the northeast, kind of pushing these thunderstorms away from the center, the vortex is kind of tilted. And so you have your lower level vortex right about here, but then your mid-level vortex kind of resides right within these showers and thunderstorms. And how we can tell there's a lot of wind shear is because you can see these showers and thunderstorms forming along a lot of these bands, but then these clouds immediately start to shoot down to the south and west. And that is reminiscent of some shear that is present in the atmosphere, which means that that is indeed the case of why Tropical Depression 9 is kind of going through a tough go-around right about right now. Now, believe it or not, the hurricane hunters have also went into the system to try and see what's going on with this. And interestingly enough, it is starting to find, once again, a little bit of a tightening within its actual lower level circulation. So here's the first pass. It went through about here. It passed through on the side. Then it decided to go through up again, try to pass through it completely. And then it went and approached from the western side, go to the eastern side, and then went back to its actual bay. But you can see here on the first pass, you clearly have wind barbs that are moving about a bit due westerly right on the northern side. And then on the southern side, you see your easterly winds, and then a quick shift within that, within the first pass right there. But what gets really interesting after that is the second and third passes, and they are a little bit harder to see. But you can see on the third pass here, you have southerly winds, so winds coming from the south moving to the north, and then you have your northerly winds right here coming from the north moving to the south. But you also have some winds here that are relatively calm on the western side, which means that it is not completely defined quite yet. It still needs to once again centralize into one specific spot so that the vortex doesn't have to do any loop-de-loops that we described earlier. And so it is, once again, still relatively weak, and a part of that is because of how the shear has tilted the vortex, and it is kind of pulling it like a rope towards the mid-level vortex a little bit. So that's kind of the reason why we have a bit of our loop-de-loop characteristics here within this system. So now this is where things get pretty dicey with the track of TD-9, and you can see I went back in time just a little teeny bit, so you can see that this is Wednesday in which we are talking about now, which is a couple of days before. And here was Fiona way back when near the Bahamas. This is basically a main contributor as to why TD-9 is what it is right now. And the big reason for that is because whenever tropical cyclones form, in the upper levels, you have a lot of this divergence to where whenever it gets a lot of that thunderstorm activity, it shoots out its ventilation, which is just basically excess showers and thunderstorms, or cirrus clouds, if you will, the clouds that are at the top portion of the system, and shoots it out so that way it clears more room for more showers and thunderstorms to form under the actual low pressure. And we have this anticyclone. It usually moves in an anticyclonic fashion, which is clockwise, and you can see we have that from Fiona to where we have this general clockwise spin right within this area. Now, why this is important is because this can also generate its own shear across the board in other areas of nearby, ocean land masses. And so we have our wind shear that is kind of becoming a part of what Fiona was, that is starting to inhibit Tropical Depression 9. And as this continues to move on through, you can see that wind shear continues to stay there. We have once again, an upper level low that's kind of just sitting over there, but this is mainly shear that is coming from Fiona. And we also have a residual high pressure system that's kind of sitting over that same exact area. And so as this continues to progress now, and we get towards the latter stages of Friday into Saturday, there is TD-9, and you can see it still has a little bit of that wind shear, but you notice these white areas indicating little to no shear. That is basically going to allow this thing to intensify further. So if it can get out of that wind shear, it will then begin to intensify. On the other hand, we also talked about this high pressure system in the central portions of the United States. This will seep down into portions of the Gulf of Mexico and eventually further in towards portions of Cuba. So you can see how this plays out here. Once we get into Saturday and Sunday, this high pressure system now kind of tries to sit itself over the general area of TD-9, and it doesn't really give off a whole lot of shear. But on the other hand, you can see shear start to kind of form from TD-9, indicating that we do have an anticyclonic spin here with this system, meaning that ventilation is good with this tropical system. However, this is where I said is where things get dicey. The GFS and the Euro and even the HWRF don't exactly agree in regards to the positioning of this tropical system. And what I mean by this is that the Euro actually depicts the tropical system a little bit further towards the north, towards portions of Jamaica, whereas the GFS actually positions it a little bit further west. And why this is important is because depending upon the positioning of this actual tropical system, we can then determine as to where the turn will occur and which part of, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and even potentially the United States could potentially be impacted. And I have a hunch as to why this is and where the turn could potentially occur. The main reason for that is based off of where the low pressure system forms to begin with. And we notice here that with the GFS, we'll actually go to right about here. You notice the low pressure system right here, very low compared to where the Euro was, which is a lot further north in regards to its positioning. So there's the low pressure system right there. And it all depends upon that wind shear from Fiona that basically kind of pushes that vortex, if you will. Now, why this also matters as well is because the GFS and the Euro doesn't agree on something else. And if we align it here to 18Z on Sunday, we have an upper level low pressure system situated over here across portions of the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. And in the GFS run, this is actually right in the middle of both of those. So here's the Yucatan, there is Cuba right within there, and then there is TD-9. And you can see the streamlines indicating as to where that shear will be, but this can also basically kind of guide a tropical system into where its track is basically going to go. That's called the steering shear, more or less. And you can see the steering is actually originally to the north and west, but then it moves sharply north that way. So you can anticipate that with the GFS, this is going to continue to move northwest until you get to about the Yucatan and Cuba, to where it will eventually start to move north. So as it plays out, you can see that is exactly the case here with the GFS, to where it kind of barely misses Cuba, but it still brings a lot of impacts to the westernmost portion of Cuba, to where as we go with the Euro, you notice that we still have our upper level low over here. We have our cyclone right within that area, and you can see the streamlines from TD-9 indicate that the wind shear is almost due northerly. And so we have our shear that our winds are moving to the north, and that means that the Euro will take this system and bring it a little bit further to the east, and also push it a little bit further north, meaning that if this does move through Cuba, you can expect the southern portions of Florida to potentially get the brunt of this impact, whereas the GFS actually takes it a little bit further north here towards portions of Tampa and St. Petersburg. So that'll be something to watch out for as this continues to move on through. The positioning of the system in regards to where the cyclone actually forms, where the actual vortice of this tropical system actually cements itself and aligns with the mid-level circulation, as well as where that upper level low actually is, can completely dictate as to the positioning of this tropical system. So now if we look out in front of this, if we know that the actual tropical system is going to be moving off towards the Gulf of Mexico and eventually towards Cuba and the Yucatan, we can look at the environment out in front of it, and we notice we have some very warm sea surface temperatures. You see a lot of reds there. That indicates some very favorable sea surface temperatures, which allows tropical systems to continue to kind of pull that moisture up, create showers and thunderstorms, and continue to sustain. But what about this? This is called the ocean heat content, and basically, this is the tropical storms or the tropical systems version of convective available potential energy for severe weather. This, in turn, takes a look at how deep the warm water extends below the surface. And if it actually extends relatively far down, then it actually provides a lot more energy than if you just have warm water at the surface. Because what ends up happening is, if you can envision as if the tropical system is an inverted funnel. So if you pour water into a funnel and then it eventually goes down into some form of cup, the funnel is the tropical system, and the water going down into the funnel is basically all that warm water, all that warm energy, that heat that actually gets pulled into the funnel and up and into the tropical system, which eventually creates your showers and thunderstorms and also allows it to potentially even rapidly intensify. So the big thing here to watch is the fact that we have some high levels of ocean heat content as you get past places like Jamaica and the Cayman Islands and approach Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, and even further past that as we get closer towards the Florida Keys. So watch out for that. But there could be a little bit of a saving grace here, because number one, you notice after that, if this storm somehow manages to move further north, the ocean heat content isn't very high over here across portions of the Big Bend of Florida, which means that it won't have as much warm water to pull up and will eventually basically run out of energy. On the other hand, and this is where we bring everything together from what we've talked about throughout this entire video, you remember that low pressure system that I was talking about that could create some severe weather on Sunday? Well, it also has some lingering effects on this system as well. You can see we have our big trough in our system. The jet stream extends further down south into portions of the southeastern United States. And you notice the streamlines from the anticyclonic spin from this tropical system. You notice it moves up into the jet stream and then it curls off. And so with this general steering flow, you can assume that the winds all along from the upper levels down to the surface are mostly towards the north, which means that the system will continue to steer north, and that curl to, once again, the north will be all the more likely. But then as this continues to move on through, you see the wind shear begin to intensify rather significantly. And if that's the case, you can expect there is more pull from this actual trough that just basically nudges this system a little bit further towards the north. And so if you can imagine, if it's on the rope, you can imagine the rope is pulling that tropical system, and it is expected to continue to kind of follow along that pathway all the way up until it actually aligns with the trough. So that is one thing to note there. It will begin to kind of weaken the system with the shear, doing something similar to what it's doing to right now with Tropical Depression 9. It will kind of tilt the vortice or the circulation in general, which will kind of prevent it from intensifying further. Usually with an intensifying tropical system, you want the actual circulation to be vertically aligned, and if it's tilted, similar to what it's doing right now, it's not really expected to intensify rather significantly. So that's kind of the saving grace here, those two things. The upper ocean heat content expected to be a lot less as it approaches Florida, unless if you are in the southern portions of Florida, to which the upper ocean heat content is still relatively high, as well as our big trough that is digging on through that is expected to bring a lot of wind shear over portions of TD-9, and that could potentially limit intensification further. But before then, we still have to figure out where is the position of this system here as it approaches Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, as well as the strait in between Central America and the Greater Antilles. Regardless, the National Hurricane Center expects this to become a major hurricane by the time we get towards mid next week. Wednesday, that is when they are expecting the system to move on through. But you notice this cone of uncertainty, and you notice how wide the actual cone actually is, and don't really pay attention. All right, if you see this black circle here with M, H, H, S right here, this doesn't really say where exactly the tropical system would be. I want you to specifically focus to this cone right here, and this is where the tropical system could potentially be. Anywhere within this cone, whether it's over here, whether it's over here, 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 here. You kind of get the point as to what I mean. That is where the tropical system could potentially be. So if you are in portions of Jamaica, even though you're not in the actual cone, you are still expected to get rain and storm surge, because you remember this tropical system is spinning counterclockwise, which means a lot of that flow will be pushed off to your north, and that could mean that the southern portions of Jamaica could see some partial storm surge, as well as some strong damaging winds, and even a little bit of rain. Maybe some flooding as an issue could be a problem over there as well. So that would be something to note. I would be watching out from Sunday morning all the way through into Sunday evening. And then as we get closer and closer towards the Cayman Islands, you guys should probably be preparing from Sunday evening into Monday morning, as this system will more than likely continue to move on through and intensify into a hurricane as this continues to push off towards the north. So for right now, if you are in Jamaica or if you're in the Cayman Islands, I would start preparing right now at this moment. As soon as you see this video, start preparing now. Either you can, fortify your area, get into a higher ground, or if you can leave the island, potentially head towards areas like Eastern Cuba, or if you can head towards portions of Hispaniola, you probably would have a better chance of at least making through this system. So once again, I will be live streaming tonight over for Nova Scotia. We will be watching the significant impacts from Fiona. If you want to watch for that, please be sure to stay tuned to my channel here tonight, as Morgan and I will be covering that live for much of everyone over there. Once again, if you're in Jamaica or in the Cayman Islands, I would start preparing now. If you're in Cuba or Florida, I would not fully discredit this completely, but have a plan of action just in case if TD-9 does end up heading off into your area. Thanks for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, especially if you are excited for the live stream tonight. Share this with friends and family and on social media. Follow me on social medias as well. Link will be in the description down below, and I will catch you guys tonight. So peace out, everyone.